We here at WKAR exist to serve Mid-Michigan with trusted journalism and local programming. Federal funding has been eliminated, which means community support is critical to sustaining this service and helping WKAR meet evolving community needs. Your ongoing support ensures public media remains freely available and locally focused. Become a sustaining member or upgrade your current gift today. Sustain what matters. Build what's next.
Michigan voters may get a chance to pick the nominees for Secretary of State and Attorney General under a proposal being pushed by Lon Johnson and others. He's the former state Democratic Party chair, and he's up next. And so is Off the Record. So sit in with us as we get the inside out. Off the Record.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Bellwether Public Relations, a full-service strategic communications agency partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and issue advocacy. Learn more at bellwetherpr.com. And now, this edition of Off the Record with Tim Skubic.
Tim. Welcome back to Studio C, another edition of Off the Record. Two polls, not one, but two polls out this week on the governor's race and U.S. Senate Democratic primary. Let's take a look at the numbers and then make some sense of same. Everybody in the nation's capital, from the president on down, are keeping a close eye and a sharp eye on the Michigan hotly contested U.S. Senate race. U.S. Senator Gary Peters is hanging it up, and so it's an open seat, and the odds-on favorite to get the Republican nomination is Mike Rogers. However, the odds in the other party as to who's going to get the nomination is not quite as clear. There's Mallory McMorrow, Abdul El-Sayed, and Haley Stevens. They are locked in a contentious battle for the Democratic nomination, and the latest polling data suggests it's a mixed bag. For example, veteran Michigan pollster Steve Mitchell's statewide survey for the Mirror's newsletter reports that Dr. El-Sayed has about a 10-point lead. Very impressive over Ms. Stevens and Ms. McMorrow, with 39% undecided. But in a different head-to-head poll by veteran pollster Richard Zuba, Mr. Rogers actually beats the Democratic frontrunner, El-Sayed, by 5 points. However, it's a statistical dead heat with the two female candidates running in the Democratic primary against Mr. Rogers. So what makes this so unusual is that the person that the Democrats currently favor to take on Mr. Rogers is the very person who would lose. What about that, Bill Ballinger, pundit?
The Republicans are hoping that El-Sayed is the Democratic nominee. They think he will be easier to beat.
As for the two women who are tied with Mr. Rogers, what would they be saying?
They're saying, look, El-Sayed may look very attractive to a lot of voters in a Democratic primary, but guess what? He's going to be a weak nominee against Mike Rogers. And one of us, whichever one is talking, McMorrow or Stevens, we would be far better as a general election candidate against Mike Rogers.
The reason everybody is bird-dogging this race, it could determine which political party runs the U.S. Senate. All right, so here's the question on the governor's race. What is a more important story, do you all think? Ms. Benson doing so well against everybody, or Mr. Duggan dropping?
Well, I think it's the Benson piece, because it shows what the climate is looking like overall. You know, traditionally we'd be saying this should look like a good year for the Republican after 8 years of a Democratic governor. And the fact that Jocelyn Benson right now has a just barely outside the margin of error lead in one survey, even with a lifelong Democrat and Mike Duggan in the race against the Republican frontrunner John James, it says, yeah, the typical midterm dynamic where the president's party, the Republican Party, has a lot of problems is manifesting, at least in this survey.
I would say, honestly, the opposite of Duggan dropping being a big story. And I think it's for a couple reasons, one of which is in that polling data, I believe, from Mr. Schuba. It shows that he has more support with Republicans than Democrats. I would be concerned if I'm a Democratic candidate for governor here that at the beginning of this race, Duggan's entry into this was seen as trouble for Democrats. It was all about how many votes is he going to take away from that side? How much is this going to potentially benefit as a middle of the road candidate? How much is this going to benefit Republicans? This could be hurting them. The monkey paw could have curled somewhere. Granted, this is, just the second poll that we've seen regarding this. And with polling, you always have to be careful. But I mean, that's something that is going to be a through line moving forward.
Break the tie, Simon.
I'd agree with Jordan that I think, it's important to note that in this chamber poll, John James and Jocelyn Benson are inside the margin of error of each other. But it's really Mike Duggan who's fallen off at 23%, whereas Benson has 34, which is outside that 4% margin of error. And so that means that, Duggan, that there was a February poll earlier, also conducted by the chamber, of registered voters. This one was conducted of likely voters. So different samples, different kinds of respondents. And that one, Duggan was doing much better back in February.
Well, he was tied with everybody.
Well, he was among likely voters in that poll. But that was a subsample of a larger one. I feel like I'm going to talk about survey methodology
now
too much here.
Now we're in the weeds.
This is why I'm not super I'm not buying the Duggan fell, because there's been one survey that showed him at 30% within the margin of error. There's a thing called outliers when it comes to polls. And right now, if you look at the bulk of the surveying that's been taken, just about all of them have Mike Duggan anywhere between 17 to 23%, with the exception of one, the chamber survey that came out. So it's possible that he fell. I'm not saying it isn't, but it also could be an outlier.
Yeah, and I think the anxiety that either party is feeling right now shouldn't necessarily be over, because while you have labels on Benson and James, Democratic and Republican candidates, Duggan isn't as well known outside of the Metro Detroit area as these other candidates. So he still has time with the right financial resources to sort of set his brand in these other areas.
I think you have to look at the Duggan numbers in the context of all those TV ads that have been on. Have you seen them? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Huh? Have you not seen them?
Right, so this is the thing. Put Progress First, the nonprofit supporting Mike Duggan, has spent about $15 million on television ads.
They borrowed it from Perry Johnson.
And a zillion billboards. Mike Duggan, the reason he got his head taken off this week, and rightfully so, over this poll, is he touted the poll that came out earlier, put him at 30%. He was like, hey, this is the proof point. I'm off and running, baby. And then look what happened. So now he has to face the music. He's like, well, what now, Mike Duggan? So, yes, this is a problem for Mike Duggan. This was a bad week for Mike Duggan.
Plus, he has to put in context where Benson picked up some ground. Female voters and younger voters, and they were and solid Democrats were coming home, they think, driven by what's going on with the president and all the economy and stuff like that. So Benson was picking up that, and it's taking away from Duggan. So what about her?
Yeah, I mean, to Zach's point on ad spending, we've seen a lot of spending from Put Progress First. We've seen a lot of spending from the super PAC supporting John James, Mission Michigan. Jocelyn Benson's largely kept her powder dry. She hasn't had any campaign spending on advertising, to my knowledge, and we haven't seen the outside groups come in that are surely going to, provide a deluge of money into this race moving forward. That hasn't happened yet.
Excuse me. What I was going to say, though, is that, for Duggan, I think the poll should be a wake-up call. And I think, and I've said this before, we talk about Duggan being this, candidate that is outside of Democrat and Republican. And he's really trying to saddle that line of, people are fed up with politics, which I've said before is a great line. But what does that mean once you actually get into office? For instance, yesterday you rolled out a plan about data centers. And I say plan somewhat loosely because, as part of it, it was basically, hey, we have to have data centers in the state, but we're also going to listen to locals who don't want data centers in the state.
I'm going to have it both ways.
So, and that's the thing, is you can't be a candidate who continues to talk out of both sides of your mouth. Who are you appealing to? I mean, clearly, obviously, he's getting Republican and some Democratic support, but at the end of the day, when it comes to meeting the rubber in the road, what actually do you stand for?
And we're in a polarized political environment right now. There are still issues that are at the top of state government's agenda over the past few years that divide Democrats and Republicans. Even people who are frustrated with both parties, they still have views on abortion, on firearm control. And those things aren't going to change moving into the general election. So the more that Mike Duggan is forced to talk about them, the stickier position he's going to be in.
I thought maybe even more interesting than the poll was just the general attitude shift from Mike Duggan this week. He said things like, I've got work to do. He talked about how his son, Ed Duggan, who's his campaign manager, said it's time to come home, meaning this, traveling the rest of the state to build up his name ID. You got to get back to Southeast Michigan, even though you've got
what does
massive.
He got to worry about?
He's got even though you have massive name ID, that's where half the votes are, and there's clearly some softening up there. So it's clear his team sees reason for concern.
Let's look at the U.S. Senate. This Democratic thing is very interesting. I thought the lead out of this thing was Mike Rogers beats the frontrunner El Sayed, and the two women tie. What did you make of that?
So two women, Mallory McMorrow and Haley Stevens. I mean, here's the thing. There's huge name recognition around El Sayed right now. There's huge consternation in between the various Democratic candidates and the people who support them. This is a messy, messy primary. And I think that, we saw that play out at the conventions earlier with the booing that occurred of Haley Stevens. Look, I think that I honestly, frankly, don't know what to make of it. With polling, as all of the things, it's up in the air.
That's an honest answer.
I mean, frankly.
I think the polling reflects a lot of the hand-wringing that you're seeing from some people in the Democratic establishment right now. I think the fear among some of these folks, especially moderates, is that this Senate Democratic primary is going to become a microcosm of I'm sorry, let me reverse that. What we saw at the Michigan Democratic Party endorsement convention is going to be a microcosm of what we see in this Senate primary. That there's going to be a lot of motivated, younger, progressive voters coming out in support of El Sayed, but then when it comes to the general election season, they're not going to turn out in the strength necessary to beat him past Mike Rogers, an established candidate with a lot of statewide
especially compared
support.
to senior citizens who show up in larger numbers traditionally.
Right, and it's important to note that this poll was a text message poll, and generally speaking, those skew towards younger voters. They're more likely to click those links and answer those online surveys.
Yeah, I'm saying right now that El Sayed has won what I would call the vibes primary, which, by the way, doesn't get you nominated, but it does mean right now there's a lot of excitement among the most progressive elements of the Democratic Party. I would hesitate to call Abdul El Sayed the front runner. 28% in a three-way race. That's not exactly, blowing the doors off the competition. And the biggest number to me is that undecided number.
It was like a third of,
Still.
almost, and with the margin of error, it was like 4 in 10 people. But that's my point, though, about sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but the hand-wringing. Okay. What do you even make of this poll? Sure, I could say tomorrow that Stevens is, up, or that Rogers would do better. What are we doing here?
Then what about the MEA?
So the Michigan Education Association, the largest public employee union in the state with more than 140,000 teachers and support staff members, announced this week that it is not yet, it may still, but not yet, making an endorsement in the governor's race.
Why did they have to say that?
That is a question I asked.
Very good. What was the answer you got?
Basically, the answer was, well, we met about it, and if we didn't say something about it, that would be a story too.
We didn't know they met. No, they could have gotten away with it.
It is astonishing. An announcement of not making a choice is a choice. And it really sent a message. And I just can't imagine what the Jocelyn Benson campaign must have thought when this was announced. She's the prohibitive frontrunner for the Democratic nomination. This union is more important than your average union because it has a reputation of not only endorsing Democrats in competitive primaries, but their candidates win. Jennifer Granholm, most of organized labor went with David Bonnier in 2002. The MEA went with Granholm, and she won. In 2018, most of labor was casting about looking for somebody other than Gretchen Whitmer. They early and enthusiastically endorsed Whitmer, and she won. So for them to not get behind Benson, wow.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Zach, I was at the MEA forum earlier this year where we saw Mike Duggan on stage, Chris Swanson, Jocelyn Benson, and Republican Mike Cox. And Chris Swanson, safe to say, is very much an underdog in this Democratic primary at the moment. He was very much saying what these employees wanted to hear. And so this committee, for them to arrive at an endorsement, they have to have a majority of the members in this selection committee. And so I think, when you look at probably, I would imagine, this is me just sort of reading the tea leaves, I think that there was probably quite a bit of division between support for Duggan, support for Swanson, and Benson. Swanson has courted labor extremely aggressively, and that's been sort of a main pillar of his campaign to this point.
Do you suppose Ms. Benson called up the MEA and said, hey?
Well, I don't know, but she hasn't done particularly well getting labor endorsements at all. Swanson, to Simon's point, has gotten quite a few. Mike Duggan's gotten quite a few. Benson has a few too, but it doesn't have Democratic frontrunner reputation of getting endorsements like usual.
All right, well, speaking of frontrunners, let's call in Lon Johnson.
there.
Welcome back to Off the Record. How many years has it been?
Geez, 10.
10? Is that really?
10, maybe 11 years.
Wow. Did you miss us?
Absolutely. Every day watching.
So you're
Every
back here
weekend.
on a new agenda. Let me just try to quickly lay the foundation of what you're trying to do. Right now, under the current system, the Attorney General, Secretary of State nominees are made at convention. You want to give the people of Michigan the right to do that, and why?
Well, first off, it's just not me. It's a we're building a coalition of
That
both
you just formed
Democrats.
this week.
We formed a committee, yes, a ballot committee called Voters Not Insiders, and it's we're building and developing that coalition now of Democrats, Republicans, business and labor, and former and current elected officials to change how we nominate our party's candidates. We're under a constitutional system that's a reflection of a bygone era. We're only one of 3 states that do it this way under a convention style.
Why didn't you change it when you were chair?
2 reasons. Number one, that's the Constitution. Number 2, as a chair of a party, if you're not focused on winning elections, you're going to get run out of town. Your job is to win elections and not run elections.
So you're looking to field a ballot proposal about this?
That's correct. So what would happen is the State House and the State Senate would have to pass a bill and put it before the voters for a decision, and the voters would then have to make the decision.
There's already going to be, in this November, a ballot proposal before voters that would allow a whole suite of constitutional changes.
Yes.
Why not just support that instead?
That'll be another question. However, we've had a number of those constitutional convention questions put before voters. They have not passed. We're not going to wait. We're going to put this. We're seeking to put this on the ballot this year.
So ballot proposals are not cheap by any sense of the word. Who is backing you? Who's supporting you in this?
Well, largely putting it on the ballot will be the job of the legislature, number one. Number 2, the polling shows that the last time we polled on this 2 years ago, it showed it at 80% for voters choosing the primary process.
So you seriously think the legislature is going to do that, though? Because the House is controlled by Republicans at the moment who very much seem to be gleeful about what happened at this past endorsement convention for Democrats.
Well, we'll see. I mean, I can't speak for Speaker Hall or Leader Brinks, but we'll see. And I think the time has come. I believe that there's consensus out there, and I think we'll find that consensus in the legislature.
The name of the committee is Voters Not Insiders, but probably the progressives on the left and the MAGA wing on the right would say, actually, this is insiders trying to step on outsiders because the convention system allows for the grassroots of each political party, as you know, as former Democratic Party chair, to have quite an effect beyond what would usually happen in a statewide primary that will cost millions of dollars to run. And these convention races are low-cost affairs. We are going to the Lincoln dinners and the legacy dinners around the state and meeting with activists. So how is this not a bunch of insiders trying to stomp on what's been going on at these conventions?
I wouldn't call presenting the voters of the state with a choice wrong. Whenever you open up a process, bring more people involved, it's the right thing to do. Having 3,000 people in a room support you, that's less than a state house primary. For offices as important as our constitutional office of Attorney General and Secretary of State, we've got to open this process.
All right, let's talk some practical politics. You have to make a deal with the Speaker to get a 2/3 vote in the House, right?
Well, I don't know that but our committee will be seeking to get the support of the legislature.
I'm just going to guess, that in return for a 2/3 vote, the Speaker might want something in return. Are you prepared to deal with him?
Again, I'm not a legislator.
You're not a legislator, but you've got a want.
Well, we have a want. Absolutely, we want to.
And so he says,
we want to bring the voters to deciding who their nominees should be, and not insiders and special interests.
And he says to you, Mr. Johnson, it's a great idea, but I need some votes for my property tax relief plan from the Democrats. Will you help me get votes?
I have no power over that. That's a
Do you
decision.
have a phone? Do you have a phone?
I have a phone.
You do, and so your phone is dead or what?
I think you're over-exaggerating my former chairman status.
Well, would you help get some votes for him in return for votes for yours?
Our job is to bring this process open to the voters and change our constitutional process.
That was not an answer to my question. Are you willing to horse trade to get what you want?
We are willing. We know our job here in this ballot committee is to open up this process. And what happens at the legislature to make that happen is between the two leaders of the state House and the state Senate. We're not here to get involved in the tit for tat negotiations of other matters.
So you're going to trust they're going to do the right thing?
Well, I think that we saw it happen in Prop 1 2 years ago. Business and labor came together. Democrats, Republicans came together on a subject that was less salient than putting candidates before the voters.
Why just these two offices, Attorney General and Secretary of State? Why not open up every office?
Well, we will be. We'll start with, ultimately we'd like to see the university boards go, be appointed by the governor. We'd like to see the Attorney General and the Secretary of State.
You'd remove the statewide election from university boards entirely.
Well, again, we won't be making that decision, the State House and State Senate. But look, anytime we our
I mean, if you're pushing for the initiative, I think you're
our theory of the
building
case
the
is that
framework.
everything needs to go before the voters. However, there's a reality of what how long this ballot can be, and what can be done in bits and pieces here to change our Constitution.
What's your concept with the Supreme Court? Those offices are nominated by the political party conventions. Now, even though they run on the nonpartisan ballot, which people have said for years is bizarre, would you make a change in how they're nominated too?
Our focus will be the Attorney General and the Secretary of State, those two constitutional offices. From there, whether folks at the legislature or others want to go beyond that, that's obviously open for discussion and debate.
Now, as memory serves, the last time that we made these changes from party member only conventions to statewide popular vote was in 1963, the last time we amended the Constitution.
Yes.
Is it just a coincidence that you're pushing for this now in a year where moderate Democrats are feeling a lot of consternation about the way their own endorsement process went at their convention?
No, in fact, that argument, what does it say about your case that you feel you can do better in a room of 3,000 insiders versus a statewide electorate? And I would use, Abdul, who's having his moment in the sun. The progressives are doing quite well on a statewide basis. So that argument just doesn't hold water. Allowing more voters into the process is always the right thing to do.
Is Mike Duggan in trouble?
I believe so. Yeah, absolutely. This poll showed that, I think, real problems. He spent $14 million. I think there's two things that we're seeing here. One, he's getting no traction. He'll be stuck at 23, 24 for quite some time, despite spending what you just said, $15 million. And second, John James, who's run statewide twice and has money been spent on his case. And Jocelyn has kept her powder dry, as you discussed earlier, and is still leading in these polls. That's real trouble. At some point, and it's going to come sooner than later, Mike is going to have to make a decision.
When you heard he was running as an independent, your first thought was?
It's a loss for our party.
Because loss in what?
It was a loss for our party. Losing Mike as a Democrat, absolutely. Yeah, it was a loss for our party.
But now, though, looking at the stakes, I mean, is it really a loss? Because it seems to be that Mr. Duggan is polling well with Republicans, which would be a boon to a Democratic gubernatorial candidate.
Look, we're not facing, we're not paying attention to Mike Duggan or John James. We're talking about Jocelyn Benson. She's solidifying this state. She's solidified our party. She's leading in the polls, and she's raising the money needed to win this race, and she's ahead in the polls. What more do you want from a candidate?
Well, why is she having trouble locking in organized labor? I mean, she's a prohibitive favorite over Chris Swanson for the Democratic nomination, and yet we're seeing one big union after another going with either Duggan or Swanson. She has a few of her own, but you'd think she'd have the whole firmament of organized labor behind her. What is going on there?
Well, in Jocelyn, we've had, a candidate that's been the top vote getter 3 times now, statewide. Mike Duggan has had extensively more relationships with labor unions, so there's a bit more familiarity there with him. And I think that as time moves forward, as we move into this campaign, you'll see Jocelyn picking up more labor union support. You just mentioned the MEA. Look, labor unions do one thing well: they negotiate. And as you just said, the key word was yet. They haven't endorsed. So we'll see what happens.
So what about her problem with the African-American community? We had Karen Weaver sitting in that chair a couple of weeks ago, who's very concerned about some people who have discrimination suits against the SOS for discriminating against them as minorities. Is that a problem?
Well, I think, clearly it's not preferable, but the Secretary of State will negotiate with that and work with that. But her record on civil rights has been clear. She's picking up support among African-American voters, not just in Detroit, but statewide. And her office is dealing with that.
So this is a blip.
Well, I don't know. You know, look, these are charges that she takes very seriously, and she will address them. But I think her record on civil rights is very, very clear. And you know, she just picked up the East Side Slate endorsement, I think 2 days ago. She's out there within the African American community and gathering support as we speak.
Talk about the U.S. Senate race. When you were party chair going into the 2014 election, the late Carl Levin decided not to seek re-election. And there was almost this instant consolidation in the party behind Gary Peters. There was very much a thought like, we cannot have a primary, we cannot blow resources, we need to get behind somebody right away. And it worked. He not only ended up being the nominee, he won going away over Terry Land.
He was the only U.S. Senate elected that year.
Yes, the only Democrat to win an open seat that year.
You took credit for that, right?
Of course.
Fast forward 12 years later, the total opposite is happening. Gary Peters decides he's not going to run again. The seat opens up. There is no consolidation. There is one of the most fractious Democratic primaries I've ever seen, and it's still only May. How much is the party at risk here of blowing this seat?
You know, I think when you look at the Senate race right now, let's talk about the progressives. You know, you talked earlier about the undecideds. How many progressive voters you know are undecided? You know, Abdul is having his moment in the sun right now. But when we look at who's remaining, they're white, non-progressive senior voters, and they're African American. And I think those voters will be going with Haley. I think this race is coming down between Haley and Abdul at this point. Picking an ideological lane is very important in a primary. Haley has done that, and Abdul has done that. And I think that will be rewarded for Haley. In terms of the ideological lane, Haley's lane is much larger.
Johnson, Mr. Johnson, quickly, how many people are on this steering committee?
That's developing now. You know, currently we're in discussions with a host of people, but we will have a rather large one, and it'll be bipartisan.
What's the one biggie you're hoping you get?
Oh, I think, you know, governors, businesses.
Oh, so Ms. Whitmer has turned you down?
We have, you know, we're not talking to the governor just yet. We're talking about past governors, Governor Engler, Governor Blanchard, other governors. You know, look, they see the need for reform, and we're trying to put together the team to get that done.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks for showing up. Also, thanks to you guys, too. All right. More Save of Off the Record next week. See you then.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Bellwether Public Relations, a full-service strategic communications agency partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and issue advocacy. Learn more at bellwetherpr.com. For more Off the Record, visit WKAR.org. Michigan public television stations have contributed to the production costs of Off the Record.